So welcome everybody. Hope you're all on the right webinar, but we are going to talk about donors today and about funds and all kinds of interesting things. At least we hope this will be interesting. The most important question of all, though, is why are we doing this webinar? The reason I decided to do this webinar is that we have encountered some really awkward situations with donors who are unhappy because they aren't receiving any thanks or recognition for the support they're giving to their favorite charities. On the other side, our nonprofit organization partners and beneficiaries are confused about why these gifts are coming through Montana Community Foundation and not through the donor, and they're really not sure what to do when the gift comes from us rather than the donor directly. We want to help you do a great job of saying thank you so your donors are motivated to find ways to benefit your organization even more. We want you to be successful in raising money, so we want to give you a heads up about what you can do to maximize the benefit you receive from Montana Community Foundation by helping you strengthen relationships with the donors who happen to give through us or through any community foundation. How does that sound? Any questions before we jump right in? Be more a back and forth discussion. So here we go. What do we need to know about the grants and distributions you may be getting from the Montana Community Foundation or in fact any community foundation? In some ways we're all extremely different. In some ways community foundations are all quite similar. So we'll talk about that more. We basically at community foundations have 5 types of funds that benefit nonprofit organizations. And there are 2 types of benefits that affect your organization. Number 1, if you get contributions to your endowments at Montana Community Foundation, that's one type of benefit that we want to address today. And then if you don't have an endowment at the Montana Community Foundation, or you have an endowment but you're also getting grants from donors' endowments, we want to explain how that works as well. And as you can see by this slide, community foundations are fairly complicated. And in terms of the different kinds of funds that we have, this is actually confusing even for people who work in the community foundation sector. And I've seen that. I've been in this sector for 20 years, and it takes a while for people to really understand the nuances between the different types of funds. We want to think of a community foundation as an umbrella organization that houses hundreds or even thousands of mini foundations beneath its umbrella. And each of those foundations, or funds as we call them, have a different purpose, a different donor or set of donors. In some cases, like with some of our affiliates, we have community foundations, for example, like Carter County Community Foundation, Great Falls Area Community Foundation, Mineral County Community Foundation, where there is really only one grant-making fund. Those are pretty simple. But most larger community foundations have, again, hundreds if not thousands of different funds. Right now we have about 1,000 at Montana Community Foundation. Again, most of those funds fall into a few different categories, so we're going to review those categories to see if we can help you make more sense of where money is coming from that your organization receives. And by the way, if you received an invitation to this webinar, at some time you've received a grant or distribution from Montana Community Foundation. That's how you got on the list. All right, here are the 5 basic types of funds, and we're going to review these one at a time. All right, we're going to do a little poll here. I want to just have you indicate whether your organization benefits from an endowment fund at Montana Community Foundation that you know of. Just mark yes or no, or if you're not sure, if you haven't received a distribution or grant for a long time, you may not be a regular beneficiary, but if you are getting any kind of regular grants or distributions, you can go ahead and mark yes. But why don't you just mark the poll really quickly, and we'll skip to the results in just a few seconds. All right, let's see. Okay, So most of you on the call today are getting some kind of regular distribution. If your nonprofit organization receives or grant or distribution from Montana Community Foundation, do you know the source of that grant or distribution? Is it from your own endowment at Montana Community Foundation? Is it a grant from a donor advised fund? Is it a grant from a donor or distribution from a donor designated fund where it's really regular every year but it's not your own fund? Do you get grants from a competitive program at MCF? Or if you're not sure of the source, just mark that. Go ahead and finish the poll. And we'll skip to the results.
Mike says poll participation is not currently available on your device.
Oh, you're having problems with the poll? No problem. It's not mandatory that you that you fill out the poll. Let's skip to the results and see. Okay. Close to half of you have an endowment at Montana Community Foundation. Often there's actually 2 endowments, and we'll explain that. A lot of you are getting grants from donor advised funds. That's awesome. That's a growth area for us. Okay, wonderful. And I just want to point out, if you're not sure about whether you're getting any money from Montana Community Foundation regularly, or you're not sure of the source, I would love to talk to you individually after the webinar, because we can actually do some research, find out what grants or distributions you've gotten in the past, where that money's coming from, and whether that money will be coming to you in the future. So by all means, I'll give you my contact information at the very end, at the last slide, and I want to talk to you individually then. Okay, moving on. Competitive grant funds. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this because actually this is a really rare occurrence when a nonprofit organization in Montana gets a competitive grant. Montana Community Foundation is a bit unusual as large community foundations go. We don't have a broad competitive grant program. Most large community foundations do. So you can't really just apply for a grant from Montana Community Foundation. And I get questions about that all the time. People, are new to a nonprofit. They call us and they say, hey, I need to raise some money. How do I apply for a grant from your community foundation? And most of the time, unfortunately, the answer is you can't, not right now. We might have a competitive program someday, but right now all of our unrestricted grant money that we might normally use for competitive grant program is committed to supporting the development of local community foundations, where we have for the last, about 12 years been devoting a lot of time and money into developing local community foundations. That's kind of the main focus of our efforts. So what that might mean is that you're more likely to get a grant from a local community foundations because our local community foundation network in Montana is growing. There are about 74, 75 community foundations now. They are attracting more assets. They're doing more grant making. So if you're not sure if you have a local community foundation, again, email me, call me. I'd be happy to connect you to your local community foundations, because most of them are very actively doing grant programs. Even though those programs might be a little bit smaller right now, it's still good for those local community foundations to be on your radar for the future. So we do have a few field of interest programs at Montana Community Foundation where we take competitive grant applications. Again, they are rare. You would have filled out an application, so you would know it if you've gotten a competitive grant in the past. And again, if you're not sure if you qualify for any of the very limited programs we have right now, we can talk later and I can let you know. So the follow-up, if you do get a competitive grant from Montana Community Foundation, you can go ahead and say thank you, not a big priority. If people can mute their line, *6 to mute your line, that'd be great. Moving on, let's get to the really important stuff here. Agency funds.
Oh, hold on, just hold on.
Yeah, if people can mute their line, again, *6, Great. Thank you. This one's pretty simple. If you're getting an annual distribution from an agency fund, that's your fund set up by your board of directors using your unrestricted money. Nonprofits usually set up agency funds because the organization has had some kind of a windfall, maybe a bequest or a large gift, and the board wants the money to go into a permanent endowment to create an annual income stream. This one is super simple because you really don't have to do anything in terms of follow-up. Hold on, there we go. None. You are making the gift to benefit your own organization, so there is really no one to thank. Get that out of the way really quickly. All right. This one is a designated agency fund. And the difference between the two is a little bit confusing, but basically an agency fund is when, again, your board has devoted your own unrestricted money to an endowment. A designated agency fund is where your donors have given to set up an endowment at Montana Community Foundation to benefit your organization. And this type of fund is really common at MCF. We have hundreds of these funds. Sometimes a nonprofit comes to us to open an endowment and then encourages their donors to give to that endowment. That's usually because you don't want to have to offer a planned giving program until when you send your donors our way, it's so that they can set up a gift annuity and take advantage of the Montana Endowment Tax Credit. But the important thing to remember is with these designated agencies, and again, these are the most common fund we have right now, is that it's your donors' money that has grown the endowment. You know that your organization has a designated agency fund because it has your name on it. Your staff has access to the quarterly statements and other fund information through our online portal, and usually your CEO or executive director is the main contact for the fund, not a donor. So same with the agency fund. Agency or agency designated, it's your endowment, your name's on it, you have access to the statements through our portal. Hopefully that's really clear. The time to thank the donors with this type of fund is not actually when you receive money back from it. So March 1st of every year, you get a distribution from your agency fund and your designated agency fund. But the important time to actually acknowledge your donors is when they make the actual gift to your endowment. When you receive a gift to either type of endowment, you'll get notified through an email, usually within a week. So even if it's a $5 gift that came through a check or someone made an online donation, within a week you will be informed that there was a new contribution to your fund. Then you can thank the donors. Also, if donors make a planned gift, which again is very common, you will get a notification letter usually in January. Most of our planned gifts come in at the end of the year, November, December. There is a huge rush all at once. So then in January we process all those planned gifts. We send you a letter indicating that a planned gift was made to benefit your organization's designated fund, and then you have an opportunity to thank the donor. One caveat about thanking donors: when a donor makes a contribution to a fund at Montana Community Foundation, we send out the acknowledgement letter. The gift is actually legally to our organization, not to your organization, even though it benefits your organization. So please don't send out the quote-unquote legal acknowledgement letters where you're putting in all the legalese language about not receiving any services in return, or et cetera, et cetera. In other words, the typical letter you would send to your donors for their tax records, you don't want to send that kind of letter because it's very confusing. The donors are actually then getting 2 tax letters for one gift. So forget all the legalese language. This is a chance to be a lot more touchy-feely in the way you're thanking the donor. For example, a handwritten note is great. A phone call is great. But just don't send out the official acknowledgement letter. Is that clear? Dorsey, I just saw that you had a question. Sorry, I missed that. Can our organization also contribute to our endowment designated agency fund? Not with your own unrestricted money. That has to go on the agency side, and that's not our decision at all. It's really just all about the FASB accounting regulations. FASB requires that we separate out contributions that come from your organization versus contributions that come from a donor. And really, it's kind of two halves of a whole. It is in a separate fund. You get separate statements, but we count both when it comes to meeting your $25,000 minimum. So you no longer have to meet that $25,000 minimum for each fund. So for example, if you have an endowment at Montana Community Foundation and your donors have been giving to it, but you decide you want to take some of your own unrestricted money and start a brand new agency fund, that is totally fine. We will fill out a fund agreement with you, but it doesn't matter how much money is really in there. I mean, even if it's $1,000, that is totally fine. We're trying to be really flexible about those minimum fund requirements. Hope that makes sense. Next question, will you talk about how we as nonprofits are connected to donors, or rather if MCF provides information about the nonprofits with endowments to donors? I am not sure. I think what we're talking about here is whether donors know when your nonprofit has an endowment at MCF, and that is a great question. We do have a page on our website where donors can give to an endowment at MCF, and we have a drop-down list, and the name of your fund will be in that drop-down list. But you need to really publicize with your donors if you want to build that fund. That option exists, especially if they want to do some sort of a complicated gift, like a planned gift, that you don't want to handle yourself. So hopefully that makes sense. But we have hundreds and hundreds of these nonprofit endowments, and we rely on you to reach out to your donors to let them know that that is another gifting opportunity if they want to take advantage of it. So hopefully that answers your questions. All right, I think we can move on here. Donor advised funds. Okay. This type of fund is now super important at all community foundations. This is the big growth area in community foundations, and we are experiencing the same type of major growth. Right now we have about 85 donor advised funds, but we have at least 50 pending donor advised funds, and they're pending because the donors made a planned gift, and we have to wait 5 years for that planned gift to terminate, and then it goes into their donor advised funds, and they can start making grants. So I really anticipate, given that more and more of our donors are wanting to set up these type of funds, that we will probably double or triple our donor advised funds within the next 5 years. So we want to talk about this today because this is an area of potential growth in terms of the type of support you get from Montana Community Foundation. Donor advised funds are like mini family foundations. They're a very inexpensive alternative to setting up a private foundation. They're very easy to set up. People can set it up with an immediate gift or with a planned gift. Again, most of our donors are taking advantage of the Montana Endowment Tax Credit, and we're really recommending to donors actually that they set up a donor advised fund rather than a designated fund because there's so much more flexibility. The situation with donor advised funds is that you definitely want to pay attention when you get a grant from a donor advised fund because it's not a guaranteed grant or distribution like you get from a designated fund. So in other words, when a donor sets up a designated fund or you have your own designated fund, you are guaranteed a payout every single year. Again, March 1st is the target date every year to get that distribution. With a donor advised fund, they're told that they have a certain amount of money to give away in grants every year, and they can do something totally different every single year. And some of them do. Some of them are pretty consistent about giving to the same organizations every year, but they don't have to. So that means it's really, really important to cultivate donors when you get a grant from a donor advised fund, because the donor, if they're not happy with the response or the recognition or the acknowledgement they get from you, they could decide to give to a completely different organization next year. Does that make sense to everyone? All right, let's see. Let's talk about cultivation. And Dorsey, I saw your question here. I'm going to answer it in just a second. Let me just finish this section about donor advised fund. We send you a check when you get a grant from a donor advised fund. If you get a distribution from a designated fund, whether it's a family designated fund, which I'll talk about in a few minutes, or your own designated fund, you're actually getting an ACH payment. So you're not even getting a check, though we do follow it up with a letter. If you get a paper check, that means you have probably just received a grant from a donor advised fund. And in the letter, we will tell you what fund it's from, and we will almost always give you the donor's name and mailing address, unless the donor has specifically indicated that they don't want that information released or it's an anonymous grant. So we're giving you the tool you need to cultivate that donor. Now, in some cases with a donor advised fund grant, you know the donor already. This is your donor. They're just giving you money through their donor advised fund. In other cases, these are donors that may not be on your in your donor database, and that's kind of a sticking point. That's real important to realize that they're still your donor, even if they're giving through us and the gift is officially or legally from the Montana Community Foundation. You want to treat that donor as if they were your donor and start cultivating them, especially if you've never received a grant from this person again or before. Again, this is probably going to sound real familiar, but don't send an official acknowledgement letter. Send a nice thank you note. A handwritten note is always nice. If you want to give us a call, we can usually give you their phone number if you really want to just call them and say thank you. It's really up to you in terms of how you cultivate the donor, but we definitely routinely will give you their name and mailing address. All right. Another thing that you might want to consider doing with a donor advised fund grant, because again it's not guaranteed, is doing some follow-up. We love it when nonprofits send us reports afterwards or send us photos, give us an update about how the project is going if the donor has given to a specific project. And we are very happy to pass that along. Since you do have the donor's address, you can put them in your database and send them that information directly. But the more follow-up you do in terms of thanking the donor and letting them know what you did with the money, the more likely it is that you're going to get another grant from that donor advised fund. So this becomes super, super important. Don't let the fact that this grant is from a donor advised fund deter you from providing recognition and acknowledgement to donors in your media materials. For example, in your newsletters, in your annual report, on your website. This became a real sticking point for one of our donors who was giving a lot of money to a lot of organizations in Helena, but he and his wife were not being listed anywhere in any newsletter, website, annual report as being a donor, and he was quite upset about this. And we really don't want that to happen. We don't want this to become an issue between you and a donor that keeps that donor from continuing to support your organization. So, for example, if Judy Smith gives a grant to your organization through Montana Community Foundation, you want to include that gift in your list on your newsletter or in your annual report. You would just call it a gift from the Judy Smith Fund at Montana Community Foundation. So you're still mentioning the donor's name, but then you are also mentioning that it came through a fund at Montana Community Foundation. If you're not sure about how to provide accurate recognition for a gift, that's something that, again, we can have a conversation about that. One thing that I suggest is you think about doing some soft credits. If you have a donor database, a constituent management system, where we're officially the donor, we're the legal donor, so that your donor database would indicate that the gift came from XYZ Fund at Montana Community Foundation, but you can also enter the donor's information, create a record for them, and do a soft credit. So that way when you pull up a donor's information, you can see not only the gifts that they might have given you directly, but also the gifts that came from Montana Community Foundation. That is one of the issues we've found also, is that donors might be giving you annual gifts, maybe $100, $200 a year, but they're giving their bigger gifts to you through the Community Foundation because they happen to have a donor advised fund. You want to take all of those gifts into consideration when you're putting a donor at a certain gift level. And again, you might have to do some manual manipulation of the data, but please be really careful about those donors that are giving you big gifts through a donor advised fund. Don't neglect them because donors really, really do notice that type of thing. Okay, I'm going to go back to Dorsey's question now. Is there a way to create a direct link to our endowment designated agency fund to share with donors? You know what? I will check on that, Dorsey, and I will get back to you about that because I'm not sure. There probably is a link, but I will find out. All right, moving on. Let's talk about designated funds. All right. By the way, let's stop for just a second, take a breath, and see if anybody has any questions or comments that you would like to make at this time before we dive into the next type of fund. Anyone? No? Okay. The subtle differences between these kind of funds can be really confusing, and I apologize for that. If this doesn't make a whole lot of sense to you, you're not alone. Again, I would be happy to talk to you individually after this webinar to give you some more feedback about how this affects your organization directly. But we do want to move into this important category, donor-designated funds. The difference between that and agency-designated funds, well, let's just say they're similar to agency-designated funds in that you get a regular predictable distribution every year on March 1st. However, donor or family-designated funds are created by individuals for their own giving. These aren't funds that have multiple donors that are just supporting your organization. Your name isn't on these funds. The distributions from these funds also vary hugely in size. So we have donors with big funds and only a few benefiting charities, and they make really large distributions to those beneficiaries. We also have donors that have small funds and a lot of beneficiaries, and sometimes the distribution you get is really small. So in this category, distributions vary anywhere from $50 up to like $20,000. Per distribution. So there is, potential here. We do have donors that are coming to us who eventually want to set up a designated fund from their donor advised fund. So in other words, donor advised funds is the growth category. But if people don't want their children to take over their donor advised fund after they pass away, maybe their children have very different charitable interests or live in a different part of the country, then a lot of donors have indicated that once they pass away, they want their donor advised funds to convert into a donor designated fund where every year the fund will give to the same group of their favorite charities. So this is an opportunity, again, if you have a donor who's given to you through a donor advised fund, take really good care of them, because you may end up as the permanent beneficiary of their fund after they pass away. So again, important thing to keep in mind. Let's see if there's anything else we can talk about. One issue again is it's really easy to ignore the gifts from a donor designated fund because they're made by an ACH payment. And literally, we have nonprofits call us every year and say, hey, aren't I supposed to get some sort of payment from some sort of fund? And it turns out they got the payment on time, but they didn't even notice it in their checking account. Because it's sent by ACH, then we send a follow-up letter, but often the accountant is dealing with the ACH payment, somebody else is dealing with the letter, and there isn't communication between departments, so nobody really realizes what this gift is for. And as a result, what happens is the donor doesn't get thanked. So even though the donors have set up these funds to benefit you every single year, please take the time to thank the donors. These donor-designated funds are hard to change. We don't just on a whim allow the donor to change their beneficiary because they're upset with you that you didn't thank them properly. Changing the beneficiaries of a designated fund is really hard. We have to go through board approval process. We also have to go to the Montana Attorney General's office and get their okay. So it is not something we take lightly, but we just need you to know that, in some rare circumstances, we have had donors successfully ask for and receive a variance, and so which means that they could potentially change the amount that you get out of their fund, or maybe even be taken off the list of recipients altogether. So just pay attention to these donors. If you're getting ACH payments, again, if it's your own fund, you don't have to thank a donor except when they give a new contribution to your endowment. But if you're getting a benefit from a family designated fund, treat that really seriously and thank the donors. All right, got another quick question from Noreen. Are you saying that MCF sends a letter to the nonprofit indicating ACH has been deposited? Yes. The letter goes out within a week of when the ACH payment was deposited into your account. And the reason we stopped sending out paper checks is because so many checks just went missing. A few of them did probably get lost in the mail, but a lot of times what happens is people just throw a check in a file folder somewhere, it gets misplaced, and it never gets cashed. So we found that ACH payments were much more secure. They were much faster because they go into your account and they appear in your account within 24 hours probably, while a check takes days and days to get to you, and then takes a while to deposit, et cetera. So we just have converted pretty much everybody over to ACH payments. So hopefully that makes sense. Chantel had a quick question. Will you review the current rate at which endowment funds are generating revenue? I think you mean our payout rate. Yes, the payout rate, short answer is 4.5% based on a 12-quarter rolling average. So if you have a designated fund with us, or you're benefiting from a designated fund that a donor has, you're going to get 4.5% of the assets based on a 3-year average to kind of soften the ups and downs in the market. And then with a designated fund, you just have to remember, if it's a donor-designated fund, you may not be the only beneficiary. So then it's also prorated depending on what percentage of the total payout that the donor wanted your organization to get. And a lot of donors have multiple beneficiaries for their family-designated funds. So hopefully that makes sense. Okay, let's move on here. I think with the follow-up, we've gone over all this before. The instructions should look super familiar. Let's talk about anonymous donors. I've mentioned this before, but I just want to reiterate that just because donors are anonymous doesn't mean that you don't want to thank them. We will help you do that. So send any kind of follow-up to us. So send your handwritten thank you or your photos or your follow-up reports, anything you want that donor to see. Send it to us and indicate that it's follow-up for a specific grant, and we will go ahead and figure out who the donor is, and we will mail it to them. It takes a little bit of our staff time to do that, but we are more than willing to help support your cultivation of your donor. And again, it is hard sometimes when donors want to be anonymous because you don't know if they're already donors that you are familiar with and you're working with. But unfortunately, there are a certain percentage of our donors that really, really want to give anonymously, and we will help you do whatever we can to make sure that you have a strong relationship with those donors. Phew, okay, that was quite a bit of information in a short period of time. Time for questions. So let's unmute the lines and give me your questions, your feedback, your comments. Anything at all. You can even ask a question that's not specifically related to the topic we just discussed. Anything. Don't be shy. Okay, we're going to move on then. Sounds like I must have done a good job because none of you have questions. This is my contact information. As the Director of Donor Services, I am here to take care of anybody that has a fund at the Montana Community Foundation. And I'm like the go-to person if you have a question and you're not sure who to ask at the Community Foundation. I'm a good person to start with. I've been here the longest. I've been with the Montana Community Foundation about 14 years now. And I kind of can answer most questions, and if I can't, I know who will be able to answer most questions. We have 17 staff now, 16, 17 staff. Gosh, I lose track. So it is really confusing to know who to talk to. When in doubt, give me a call, and I'm perfectly happy to get texts. I'm available evenings and weekends, so anytime you need anything, start with me and we can go from there. Now, if you have any specific questions about a planned gift, the go-to person, you can call me, but the go-to person is Joanne. She is our planned giving paperwork guru. She's in our Missoula office, and she is wonderful, and she loves to help people with their questions, so she'd be the person to call. And Alexandria, you had a great question. Let's finish up with this. Why do donors select this method of giving? In other words, why do donors go through Montana Community Foundation rather than give to your organization directly? In a nutshell, the Montana Community Foundation and community foundations in general are really experts at dealing with more complicated gifts. So for example, if your donor has a piece of land, ranch land, and they want to use that in order to benefit your organization, you may not have the staff or the gift acceptance policies in place or the time, energy, and money to process a really complicated gift like of property. Or even stock gifts sometimes can be a little bit intimidating if you don't have a brokerage account and you don't know how to process stock gifts. Certainly planned gifts, most nonprofits do not want to do a planned giving program. I'll just lay it out there because it is a potential liability for your organization. And I'm happy to talk to anybody about this in more detail one-on-one after this webinar. But in other words, we're here to handle the gifts that you really don't want to handle that will benefit your organization, but it's going to be more time and hassle for you to deal with. You don't want to buy planned giving software. You don't want to take on the liability. You don't have to worry about brokerage accounts. We will do all of that for you. Also, some donors will leave gifts to us because they specifically want their gift to be endowed to provide annual income. If they give a gift like that to a community foundation, they know that the corpus the main part of the gift will not be spent. It will just generate income in perpetuity. And unfortunately, sometimes when a gift is given directly to a nonprofit, there are certainly circumstances that I know of, that most of you probably know of, where boards, when they have access to that money, sometimes don't treat it as permanently restricted. They actually start using the corpus when fundraising is a little tough, or they lose their funding in some capacity. It's really tempting to start eating away at an endowment. So sometimes it's like an extra insurance policy for a donor to give that gift through Montana Community Foundation, because we will only distribute the 4.5%. We won't start invading the corpus. And one more question. Peggy, is there a place on the portal to find out who has given to our foundation? We do list recent contributions. I'm not sure I think it goes back a few years. But if you want the full giving history for your fund, I can run those reports for you. Not a problem. You just let me know that you need it, and I can generate it for you. Because some of the agency funds, agency designated funds we have, are really old, like 20, 25 years old, and we just don't have all that information on the portal. So you'll see just the most recent gifts on the portal. But if you want to check the portal every so often, you go on the portal anyway to download your statements. That's a good time to just look at those contributions. We also, again, will send you an email or a letter for a planned gift when you do get a new contribution, because we don't want you to miss that. All right. I think we're all done. Any other last-minute questions? Very good. Thank you so much for participating today. I really appreciate it and hope this was helpful. Call me if you have any additional questions later. Bye-bye, everyone.